Thanks for joining, folks. My name is Jason Goodman, and I manage content and product marketing here at Resilio. And today we're going to have Josh Sargent, our VP of Partnerships, speak with us, and James Moore, one of our customer solution engineers, is going to give us a demo towards the end. And what I would like to say before we get going here is just there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to start asking questions. Those will queue up and we'll get to those towards the end of the presentation. And, with that, let's just kind of dive into the introductions here. We're going to talk a little bit about Resilio, who we are, what we do. We're going to get into some of the challenges and talk specifically about Resilio Connect and what some of the use cases are for server sync. Then we'll get into a live demo and field questions towards the end. So Josh, if you could move us forward, that would be great. So again, for those of you who are not familiar with Resilio, we're a software company. We essentially have software that really helps customers move their data reliably. And what we're seeing is we've got a number of solutions where customers use us for everything for the extreme far edge, where you're moving data in bulk across extremely unreliable networks, to the far opposite end of the spectrum, where you're doing exceptionally high speed parallel server sync across hundreds of servers concurrently. So across the board, what we're finding is that the common theme among our customers, and if Josh, you go on to the next slide, is really that all of them place a tremendous value on their data. And that it is absolutely critical that users, applications, workflows have continuous access to the data, and that gets to where it needs to go reliably and on time. And this is really what we're going to talk to you about today, focusing in on server sync and what our customers like Match.com are doing in that space, as well as a number of other big ones like EA. So with that, Josh, why don't I hand it off to you? You can talk to some of the challenges that customers are facing in the server sync realm.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. And thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate your time. So I'm going to talk to you just about some challenges with server synchronization out there today. We'll talk a little bit about Resilio and our Connect product, and some features of that sort of solve some of these problems, and then talk about some use cases that a lot of our customers use us for as it relates specifically to server sync. Of course, there are a lot more use cases than just server synchronization, but we'll focus on that today. Syncing data seems like it ought to be a pretty simple problem to solve, but there's a lot of legacy technology out there, a lot of storage-based replication products, that are different based on, which hardware vendor you choose. Different operating systems have different tools built in. And typically these don't get a lot of attention, right? You build a tool to sync some data, and it's not really something that gets a whole lot of attention because it's not a big headline feature typically. But syncing data these days becomes more and more important for customers, depending on what they're trying to accomplish, and dealing with old tools that were designed back in the 70s or even before. They just don't scale to meet today's challenges. They weren't built for the types of replication topologies that customers need today. They weren't built for the size of the data, the types of networks that we have available today. And so we aim to solve that. These tools typically aren't scalable. In other words, they're not scaling to huge data sets. They're not scaling to many servers. And that's something else that we try to accomplish with our tool. Those things sort of add up to slow performance and unreliable performance from those tools. Getting a whole lot of data synchronized quickly or to a lot of systems quickly is a big challenge for a lot of our customers who are looking to do various things like data migrations or hybrid multi-cloud type solutions, syncing huge enterprise NAS devices, storage devices, things like that. And these things, are not built with ease of administration in mind. A lot of them are command line tools, and they don't provide a lot of instrumentation or insight into what's going on. That makes them hard to troubleshoot. They don't typically get a lot of support from, people who built them. When it's important to your business to be able to move data and sync data quickly, you want these tools to be reliable. You want to be able to find out what's going on. You want to know the status of the synchronization of your data, and be able to diagnose it and get great support and manage things effectively. So a lot of the way I would guess that the primary way that customers are syncing data today is with a hub and spoke type architecture, where they've got one central data center, one central cloud location, one central server that's sort of like the master, and it's syncing with maybe several remote servers. Maybe they're in the same data center, maybe they're in remote data centers, who knows. But the point is, it's a hub and a lot of spokes, and they all sort of come back to that central hub, and that's problematic for a few reasons. And when it comes to scale and performance and reliability, this architecture doesn't really measure up. As you scale out and have more spokes, more remote servers that you need to synchronize to, it keeps putting more and more pressure on that central hub, both that server and the storage that backs it, but also that network connection in that central data center. It's just going to keep putting more and more pressure on it. It has to keep doing more and more work, and at some point things break. And that it makes it a single point of failure as well. If that server does go down or that connection does go down, all of those spokes are kind of dead in the water. They can't sync data, and that's no good. And that's, I would say, that's probably the number one architecture that people are using to synchronize multiple servers today. Occasionally you do get to customers that are doing this sort of cascading style, or you can call it follow the sun, but it's basically point to point to point, where you've got a single device. And a lot of times this happens because some enterprise storage devices can't sync point to multi-point. And so the only way to accomplish it is to do sort of this cascaded design. And so you end up in the situation where, the first location is syncing to the second, and the second then syncs to the third, and third maybe to the fourth. And this doesn't scale for obvious reasons. It takes forever to get to the end of the chain. And if any point in the line breaks down, or any connection breaks down, again, everything after that point is sort of dead in the water. And if you're trying to do bi-directional replication, it's even worse. So this architecture just doesn't scale for a number of reasons, but unfortunately, it's like all you can get with certain hardware devices. So what makes Resilio different is that we use this peer-to-peer architecture, and it's something of a novel architecture in terms of data synchronization tools, or file replication tools, where we sort of do away with those old architectures, replace it with this peer-to-peer architecture, which allows all of the servers to communicate with each other, or all of the nodes. It's not just servers, but all of these agents are sort of syncing with each other. They all serve data to each other and get data from each other. And this is better than the other architectures in a number of ways. First of all, it alleviates any sort of single point of failure. So that if any one agent or node in your architecture goes down, it's totally fine. All the other peers can keep synchronizing data. They're not stopped. They're not prevented from syncing data. They just keep going, and your business stays up and running. And when that server comes back up, we'll automatically get it back in sync, and all the other peers will sort of swarm it with data that it's missing, and no administrator intervention required. So it provides for better availability characteristics, in addition to better performance characteristics and scale characteristics. Because with a hub and spoke architecture, and then the cascading architecture, as you add more and more devices, it keeps putting more and more pressure, and things slow down. It takes longer to accomplish the synchronization. But with a peer-to-peer architecture, it's sort of like a rising tide lifts all boats. The more peers you have sort of sharing the workload, the faster and more highly available and more reliable everything gets. So we scale with this peer-to-peer architecture extremely well. And of course, because we're synchronizing with all these servers simultaneously, and everybody's sort of participating in serving data and receiving data from each other, we can sync the same amount of data to 1,000 devices just as fast as we can sync it to one device. And so distributing data to many endpoints, there's just no faster way to accomplish it. And so this peer-to-peer architecture is, like I said, better for performance, scale, and availability. So it's a great architecture. And Resilio Connect is our solution, which implements this architecture specifically for file and folder synchronization. And there's really two parts to the solution. It's a centrally managed solution. So there's this management console, which is where administrators sort of come to manage the environment, configure, make changes to settings, things like this, but also to then monitor the environment and see what's going on. And so we provide this very simple modern web GUI, which allows administrators to do all these things, and then come and see these dashboards at multiple levels, where you can start out with a high level dashboard and see kind of your entire environment at a glance, but then drill down and get more granular level of detail at, say, the job level. If you want to look at one particular synchronization job, or you want to look at what's going on with one particular server or one particular agent, and you can get a new set of dashboards just focused at that level. And so, unlike those older tools where you're probably Googling for some CLI command and then like trying to figure out how to interpret the text output, and figuring out sort of the right magic incantation to get any kind of insight into what's going on, or looking at logs after the fact, you can come right into this simple modern web GUI and see what's going on with great instrumentation, great statistics. The management console also collects all the logs from all the remote agents, so you've got one pane of glass, one place to come see everything about the environment. And this management console can handle huge environments. Our largest customers run hundreds of thousands of devices. So it scales really well. So the management console, that's kind of like your main interface to interacting with the environment. And then there's the agent component, right? And the agent is what gets installed on the servers that are actually going to sync data, servers or workstations, any device that needs to sync data. And that's where all the real work happens, right? These guys are responsible for actually moving data and syncing between each other. So they talk to each other, they sync directly with each other. The management console doesn't actually sync data, and it's not in the data path, right? It's just sort of a policy and a reporting console, but the agents are syncing data between each other. And this is not, syncing through some Resilio cloud server or cloud storage or anything. This is totally private for customers. It syncs only between your infrastructure, so you're in complete control. And it goes really fast because it's not coming through any third-party, hosted environment. And so it's just these two components, a very simple, very elegant solution where the agents are sort of doing the work, management console manages and monitors. And this solution, Resilio Connect, brings a bunch of sort of advantages compared to those old tools. Some of them are obvious by now, right? But one of them is our simplicity. It's super easy to get Resilio Connect installed and up and running in your environment. We typically have this up and running in about 45 minutes to an hour for customers. So we can stand them up and get data syncing and flowing and solving problems, especially for like Microsoft DFSR customers. we can solve problems for them really quickly. It's really easy to set up, really easy to roll this thing out and deploy it to multiple devices and get data syncing, regardless of sort of your current status of where data is. A lot of customers come to us in a little bit of a bind where they've been syncing data with some other tool, and things have not worked out very well, and they've got some data here and some data there, and some data is newer, in this other location. We have the ability, because we support pre-seeded files, we can sort of get all that worked out for you, right? And get the most recent versions of files synced up and get everything in a good state for you. We also provide automation capabilities. So we can be a very simple synchronization tool. We can also be integrated into very complicated, complex environments where customers have built very sophisticated build pipelines, for instance, and they've got workflows designed where they need certain operations to happen, and then data to, the output of some analysis to be synchronized to different locations, and then, something else happens. And we have a full RESTful API that you can use to control the entire environment programmatically. and you can sort of build this into your pipeline, or automate standing up and tearing down of environments. It's pretty amazing what you can do with our API. I mentioned the visibility and control. I don't think there's another product out there that gives you as good of instrumentation as we provide, and insight into what's going on. And it's all sort of founded on that peer-to-peer architecture. So the reliability, sort of uptime of the solution is fantastic. But we do focus on speed, and it's not all about that peer-to-peer architecture. We also have, for instance, our own WAN acceleration protocol that we use to help customers sync as fast as possible over any distance, regardless of latency. And we can sync very, very large data sets. Some of our larger customers sync 400, 500, 600, up to 800 million files, and I think is our largest install today. So if you have huge data sets, you'll be hard pressed, I think, to find another tool that scales as large in terms of data set size as we do as well. But the benefits that all these features bring really comes down to feeling comfortable, feeling confident that your business is going to stay up and running, regardless of data set size, regardless of scale. You've got a solution in place that's going to scale with you and not cause you to lose sleep at night. You can be confident that data is going to get where it needs to go in certain time frames. Some customer sets have workflows that are, it's very important that data arrives and is available at certain times for regulatory reasons, or just business deadlines. And when you have large environments, even if you have small environments, not a ton of servers, smaller shops tend to not have the ability to spend a bunch of time managing and troubleshooting tools like this. Large environments, it's complicated to manage data synchronization to lots and lots of devices. So it can really be a time sink. And so having a solution that you can just rely on and trust, you get it set up, you get it optimized for your workflow or your environment, and you can trust that it's going to work well, is really important to our customers. And server synchronization sounds like pretty straightforward, right? You envision, a couple servers and you need to sync some data, but it's actually, there's some complicated use case or varied use cases that are common among our customers. And I want to talk to you just about a few of them before James digs into the demo for you. Our tool is very simple, right? We sync files and folders, and so therefore it's useful in all kinds of scenarios. And server sync is sort of a subset of those use cases. And within that server sync category, there's all kinds of reasons that customers use us for server synchronization. So I'll talk about some of these. Syncing file servers is like the obvious one, right? You got some Windows file servers or Linux file servers or something, and you got a few of them, maybe for high availability or because you got multiple locations. Maybe you got NAS devices like Synology or QNAP, or maybe you've got a big enterprise system like a NetApp or an Isilon or something like that, and you need to keep these things in sync. Again, for DR or high availability or remote locations. And a lot of those tools or a lot of those systems have data synchronization capabilities built in. Some of them you pay for, some of them just come for free. But in every case, even with the big enterprise players, they're usually very simple tools that are capable of doing, say, point in time based replication in one direction, and it's active passive. In other words, like, one site you can be reading and writing, and then the remote site you can be reading but not writing. You can't do sort of bi-directional replication. And it's not in real time. It's usually like on a scheduled basis. And so the benefit we bring to this use case is the ability to sync to any number of locations, any number of devices, in any way you need. And not just have, we can sync one way, just like those systems, but we can also sync bi-directionally in real time. So you can have collaboration, or maybe split users between locations or between systems to load balance. But we can also do many to many, omnidirectional. Maybe you got 30 sites and you need to synchronize them. A lot of our customers do. And traditional tools just can't handle that. you need a system or a product that can do omnidirectional syncing, where you can be active in all of those locations and syncing back and forth and keeping everything in sync. And that's a huge differentiator. But of course, you got to do those things reliably, make sure you're not syncing corrupt data. It's got to be encrypted, all these things we take care of for you. Remote office, branch office synchronization. This is very common for, things like law firms, or even like fast food chains, restaurants, gas stations, things like this, where they've got lots and lots of smaller remote sites. They've got maybe a big data center or big headquarters where they've got lots and lots of data, and they need to provide access to some data to those remote locations, maybe not all of it. So we give you the ability to put less infrastructure out at those remote offices, less infrastructure, cheaper infrastructure, and sort of sync, perhaps on demand for some of them, if you want to do full syncs for others. Gives faster access to those users at those remote locations with a reliable way and efficient way to sync data out to them. But we also have customers that are just syncing within a data center or on some LAN, or within a branch office, like at a bank, where maybe you've got like 30 machines in a branch location, and you just need to sync really fast over the LAN. There's no WAN involved necessarily. A lot of our like high performance compute customers, and some customers that have large application stacks, maybe a farm of application servers, or farm of web servers, for instance, they need to sync similar content to a big pool of systems at very high speed, maybe 10 gigabits per second. We also do this really, really well for customers. Our video gaming customers, for instance, use this a lot to distribute video game builds for testing and things like this at very, very high speeds. We can go 10 gigabits per second plus between devices, like per agent. So if you scale that out to many agents, you can get aggregate throughput in the hundreds of gigabits per second. Really, regardless of distance. That's not just on the LAN. We can do 10 gigabits per second plus around the globe if you've got the bandwidth, regardless of latency. I mentioned web and application server syncs, but the hybrid and multi-cloud sync is something that seems to only keep growing in popularity with our customers. A lot of customers have on-prem data centers or infrastructure that's physical in one of their locations. Maybe they want to dip their toe in the water with the cloud and sync some data up to the cloud just for high availability, or as the first step in their move to the cloud. They haven't necessarily moved their application stack there yet. They just need to get some data up there. And it's almost never just a straight migration and cutover. It's usually, a migration to the cloud is a long-term project, and you got to get data synced up there. And then there's some amount of time that's required to get the application stack moved over. And you need to keep the cloud and on-prem infrastructure in sync for that period of time. And we can do that for customers. We can sync really anywhere. Of course, we support all the major cloud providers, and you can sync between cloud regions. You can sync between availability zones within a region, which you might not think would be a limitation for a lot of these cloud providers and their storage solutions, but it really is. We get brought into opportunities with cloud providers all the time because they can sync between regions, but they can't sync between availability zones within a single region. And again, we can kind of sync anywhere, including object storage. So if you want to sync to Amazon S3 or Azure Blobs, we can sync to any S3 compatible type object storage. You see logos here for the big providers, but also, we support platforms like Wasabi or Backblaze B2, these lower cost object storage providers. So if you need to sync between on-prem and the cloud, or just cloud to cloud, or multi-cloud, we can help you with that as well. So that's the real fast overview of Resilio Connect, specifically for server sync use cases. There's other use cases that customers use for them. We have other webinars focused on those topics. I invite you to look at, but I'd like to turn it over to James to show you what this interface looks like and kind of what's possible, how simple it is to set up server synchronization and kind of what you can see. So James, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right, so you guys should be able to see our Resilio Connect console now. This is the first screen that you'll be introduced to once you finish installation and kind of get the onboarding done with the POC. You can see we have several servers in our lab environment, syncing up and down about a gigabit per second. In today's demo, we're going to be looking at an East US server in Azure, a West US server in Azure. We kind of have a lab server here as well that we're playing with. There's nothing special about these servers. They are all Windows-based for our use case, but that's not a limitation. We can use Linux, Synology. Like Josh said, we could use Azure Files, Azure Blob, you name it. We can pretty much sync anything out there. Moving on, one of the best screens I think kind of start off with is the overview page. This is kind of your 50,000-foot view of the health of your environment. You can get an idea of kind of what's syncing around with our Resilio Connect agents. You can see since I've installed this lab, we've done about 5.5 terabytes of data transfer. In the last 24 hours, we're looking about 3.4 terabytes of data sync. These two graphs down here, you'll see them moving all over the place all the time to let you know, hey, is there any errors? Are any of my agents stuck? Kind of what's going on in the environment. We currently have our graphs at about 10 minutes, but we can sort these out, different lengths. You can see there's no data because I like to sleep sometimes. So, there's not much going on in the lab. But when we fired it up in the morning, you can kind of see what our overall traffic looks like, kind of, what our max throughput so far today has been the last hour. And just kind of moving on down, we get all kinds of data pulled in. Like Josh said, we log everything to the central console. You can tell that Azure apparently wasn't very happy today. We've seen quite a few network hiccups. And this can also help you do any kind of troubleshooting if you see, files not making it or you see some errors in your transfers. We do log that for you so you can see that, hey, there might be something I need to dig into a little bit further. Kind of the second best portion of this console, I would say, would be the jobs. This is where you configure your workflows, and this is how you connect all your agents up to sync to one another. We have this project files kicking it off right now, and it has just a bunch of different small files, large files. We have ISOs going back and forth right now, so you can see quite a bit of data going through. EUS in this example is our primary server, and it's seeding it out to our West US and our lab server. One of the cool things that I think, when using the Resilio Connect agent is since EUS is our primary server and the lab server has a little bit of a slower connection, it's going to seed to everybody all at once. But we can look at the the West US server is also uploading as well, and it is helping seed data to some of our other agents in the environment. So I've showed you all these fancy numbers, and I've showed you, what the speeds look like. So how hard is it to configure a job? So let's walk through that real quick. We would start by going to, configure jobs and create a new job. And this, once I click create a new job, it's going to open up a new tab for us. And since we're talking about server sync today, we are going to focus on the synchronization tab. But we do have some other use cases for server sync. We have a many to one if you need to, have a source repository seeded out to multiple servers. We do have also a consolidation type of job. So if you had, say, a bunch of logging servers out in the wild that you needed to pull in your logs from different resources, or if you had some kind of remote GIS that's logging in the wild, some kind of edge use case, you could pull those back in as well. For us, we're going to be looking at synchronization. Let's go about there. We're going to go ahead and just name this library sync. In this demo, we're going to be syncing some Kubernetes charts. So we'll just keep moving on here. I have pre-populated some of these, so you don't have to watch me, copy and paste or type out my file path, but we will focus on setting up this desktop one down at the bottom. You'll see we have several different columns. And in a server sync, let's say you had a certain DR scenario where you want it to be one way and you didn't want the remote location to be able to write back to the source. So we have this read-only checkbox. So you could turn a bidirectional sync into a one-way sync if needed. Moving on to the right, we have the selective sync box. If you're not familiar with that, it's really putting stub files or kind of placeholder files on that endpoint. Say you didn't have enough hard drive space to contain your entire file server that's in your data center. Well, this allows us to kind of create a remote caching point, or if you had some desktop or laptop or something in the wild hosting up files, you could do a selective sync and just bring down the files on demand that you need without filling up your hard drive. All right, so we'll go ahead and select a path, and here's how you would go about getting that path set. So we'll just browse to our endpoint, and you don't need physical access to this endpoint. You can do it pretty much all through the Resilio console. We're going to go to this agent tab. And I know the file that I created was on C drive and projects. We had this library sync right here. So let's say that library sync folder didn't exist. If I needed to stage that folder without getting access, we can click create folder, and it would put that folder on the remote endpoint and stage it for me automatically. So go ahead and hit save. So now I know all these folders are going to be mirrored to this desktop. We'll go ahead and move on. So a reference agent, if you had to do NTFS permissions, which we don't have set up in this lab environment, but if you needed permissions, NTFS or POSIX, we do sync that. That's not a problem. So what we would do is we'd specify a reference agent for our initial permission sync. And then once that was completed, we would, then keep everything in sync bidirectionally, no matter who was the reference agent. A little bit about this page. If we found some settings in your environment that need to be tweaked for, say, performance, or you weren't seeing quite what you expected with the job, we can set some additional parameters to help you out there. Or this priority slider up top. Let's say you had accounting needed to always be synced before a different department. We could set the accounting job to be higher. That way we made sure their files got there, no ifs, ands, or buts, depending on whatever the workload was in another department. This notifications page is pretty important. We can do SMTP and webhooks. So think webhook to Slack, Teams, Twilio, text notifications, anything like that that can take a webhook. We can integrate with that and let you know, hey, there's something wrong with your job. You need to go check it out. So we don't have any notifications for today. So we'll just go over to our review summary and save that. All right, we can see our library sync is set up. It is in progress. So let's go be nosy a little bit and see what's going on over there. So we can see that EUS has already found about 3,000 files which were staged there. I did pre-seed this data to a couple of other servers. I think this lab did not have the folder. So we can see that it's already indexing and making sure that everything matches. Then once we have a good hash and index, we're going to start transmitting that data and getting everybody caught up. So about that synchronization that's going on, if you ever had any questions or concerns about what data is being downloaded, what's being uploaded, kind of what was going on, we do keep very granular logs about that. So under that project files that we looked at earlier, let's go to our kind of master server and see what's going on. We can come over here and look at the activity. We can see we currently have 66 files in queue waiting to be transmitted out. We can see which files it's currently hashing. Scrolling down, we can get pretty granular and see which file is it writing to disk at this time. Looks like a pretty big ISO that's being transferred. We can see right now, if no data changed, we'd have a completion in about 8 minutes. But with this being a synchronization job, constantly going back and forth, that time can fluctuate all the time. So this is just letting you know, hey, at this point, if nothing new was written, we'd be done in about 8 minutes. If you wanted to get a little more nosy, kind of see what was going on in these servers, we can see the West US server. There was some cleanup done on some documents we had that were cleaned up. We can see some files were added and removed from the primary server. And you can just kind of go down. And if this was, multiple servers in a giant pool, you would see more than just West US, East US. You would see, those servers kind of adding up. So enough about logs. And oh, here's a good one, errors. So this one is a file was deleted before we were able to transfer it, but I'm kind of glad this showed up because I can dive into it a little bit. We talked about notifications earlier. So if there was an error and this error didn't clear in a certain amount of time, we could have it alert you. But let's say you had a particular error that you didn't care about. We can always check that error. So let's say locked files, for example. You don't want to know every time a file was open and locked. You can always check that. You could hit ignore error, and then it won't bug. It won't keep bugging you over and over about that error. Or we can make different rules, but we make it really easy for you. So if an error pops up, you can always click the error, set a notification, tell Resilio how you want to handle that, and move on. So one thing I'll touch on before we'll look at what the console, or sorry, not the console, but the agent window looks like kind of on an endpoint, is we'll talk about bandwidth. Let's say you had a bandwidth concern or a limitation. You didn't want to flood your data center pipe. You can come in here and it looks very similar to kind of how you would with DFS or DFSR setups. It's really kind of a paint by numbers scenario. So what you can do in here, if you want full bandwidth, which is green, we can click in here and pick the times. we can click and drag and kind of paint those in. And we had orange set. We currently had that set at 100 megs. Now, let's say you need to get a little more granular than that. You kind of wanted to do a per agent. So here's what our Resilio Connect client side looks like on the server. You can see the 3 jobs that we have this agent in. So what you can do is you can go to options, and we have this user controlled section. And currently global limit follows whatever we just looked at in the management console. But if you wanted to say, hey, this guy has his own particular limits, you can check those boxes and fill in whatever speed you needed. Or if you wanted to set a schedule, you could come into the scheduler and you can click and drag. It'll give you the same window that you kind of saw on the other screen where you can type in and fill in. All right, so one cool thing about this screen right here, we can see the project files is downloading. This is a constant transfer that we have going on to show data movement and large file movement. We can see what our current speeds are to this server. But let's say we wanted to see where this pointed. We didn't know where this was mounted. If you open up the Connect console, we can always double click and it'll pop up the SMB share, server mount, whatever you need to get to that file folder. And then now we can see what data is being synced. While we're in here, I don't know if there will be anything in this folder, but we do have this archive folder. And the archive folder is where we keep any accidental deletions during a server sync. So we can dive in and see, hey, this file was deleted. It'll be put in this archive folder for whatever period that you set. By default, it's 30 days. And then we'll go ahead and flush this out. So you always have kind of a, wouldn't call it a backup, but kind of a safe place in case there's any fat fingers or accidental deletions or file moves. All right, another thing we can kind of take a look at real quick is, let's open up a file. So we have this license file here that was part of our charts master. And then, we can just kind of delete that and do a quick test. We save that file, and then let's see. We can see the library sync has synced, and it's showing us some up and down traffic. So if we go over to our WS server, and let's see, if I go over here, there we go. Just that quick, I know it was a tiny file. So just that quick, we've seen the file. We detected the change automatically through our file notifications on Windows. And then we went ahead and synced that over, and it's moved to this West US server in just a couple of seconds. All right, guys, I know this was a really quick demo with just, kind of a little bit of high level of what we do, kind of what our overview looks like, how quick and easy we can set up a job. I hope that explained it. And if you're interested, I look forward to see you in one of my POCs. Josh, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right, thanks, James. Appreciate that. I think maybe without even knowing it, you answered a few questions that that some attendees have asked. So, Jason, should I hand it back to you to do Q&A, or?
Let me just relay a few of these questions over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the last one, James, with your WAN bandwidth allocation demo, this one's coming in from Grant, and he's like, syncing as fast as possible is great, but can it be throttled so it doesn't overload the network connections, affect latency and things like VoIP, possibly at different speeds depending on a schedule, similar to DFSR. So I think, obviously, yes, you can throttle the bandwidth, and you have pretty granular control over that, as James was painting there on the. So James, anything to add with that in terms of bandwidth control?
I don't. So I see there's a couple of different questions around bandwidth or site-to-site connections. So around bandwidth control, I don't have any more information or can get very much, very granular there. It's kind of, we can go agent by agent like I showed, or we can do a site. So let's say you have a 10 gig connection, but you don't want your site to use more than 100 megs. So you can set a site limit, and then each individual user can set a different limit other than the site limit. but they cannot exceed what you set as the site limit. So they can go up to that limit. So that's about the only thing I would add there as far as granularity. I did see some questions about, hey, what if I don't want the machines to go, connect kind of in a peer fashion? I kind of want to get a more structured, more software defined type of networking. We can do that. We do have something called tagging, and we can say, hey, these two machines can only talk to each other, and these two machines can only talk to each other. So that way, if you want certain machines to share, you can. If you don't want certain machines to talk to each other, you can limit that as well. So with our tagging feature, you can get as granular or, as complicated or uncomplicated as you want as far as structuring how machines talk to each other.
Very good. Yeah, there was another question here about Resilio Sync and just comparing the performance between something like Sync and Connect, and how Connect performance is better if it is.
We should
So Connect. Go ahead, Josh.
We should just highlight that that we do have two different products, right? Resilio Sync and Resilio Connect, just to avoid confusion. And some of these questions, it seems like maybe the questioner is used to our Resilio Sync product. Hopefully it's evident by now. We've been talking in this webinar about our Resilio Connect product, which is more sort of it's designed for servers, not laptops and desktops and individual users, although it can be used that way too. But Resilio Connect is more centrally managed and designed for server synchronizations, large data sets, et cetera. In addition to sort of product differences and feature differences and support differences, things like this, development differences, there are definitely some performance advantages with Connect. James, yell at me if I talk out of turn, but whereas Sync, might max out at 1 million files or so, Connect is going to handle much larger data sets, where Sync might cap out at maybe a little bit more than a gigabit per second. Connect is going to let you do 10 gigabits per second. So much larger data sets, much faster speeds. Our WAN acceleration protocol, Sync does have sort of a simplified version of our WAN acceleration protocol. It's several generations old. Connect is much newer and much more robust and does a much better job at high speed throughput over high latency, high packet loss type of environments. Anything else to add there, James?
I would say I don't really have anything around there, and that's correct. Our kind of small business or the Sync portion is limited to slower speeds and file capacities.
Yeah, and it's not Sync isn't designed to run on servers. You can get it to run on up to 2 servers. I think you can license it for. Connect, you can license it for hundreds of thousands. So it scales much larger. Another question asked was about syncing to cloud storage and for instance Wasabi, and that's another big difference between Sync and Connect. Sync does not support the cloud and cloud storage, object storage in the cloud, but Connect does. And the answer to that specific question is yes. Wasabi is definitely supported. We're partners with them, and we've got many customers syncing data to Wasabi. And it's because it's sort of an S3 compliant object storage solution in the cloud, and we can really work with anything that's S3 compliant. I'm just going to pull out a few more storage while we're on the topic of storage platforms like Wasabi. There's another one about Isilon, and it's a great question. Does Resilio have any tight integration with Isilon? And the answer is no, and that's really because most of these enterprise vendors that produce a solution like Isilon or NetApp, they don't really allow anybody to install software directly on their appliances. They've tried it in the past before. It turns out it hasn't been a success for them for whatever reason. And so they don't allow customers or other vendors to install software on their devices. So in those cases, you're installing Resilio agents on some VM or some container or some physical server that's mounting either an NFS mount point or an SMB share on an Isilon. And same thing for most other enterprise NAS devices like NetApp. But some, some NAS vendors that are focused more on, small office, home office, or small mid-sized business type deployments like a Synology or a QNAP or TrueNAS, used to be FreeNAS, and some others. They do allow you to install software directly on those devices. And so, yes, you can install Resilio as an agent running directly on those devices, which is a really cool and an efficient way to go.
And then we had another question here just on workflow. Is it possible to move files from server A to B instead of syncing?
Yeah, that's go ahead, Josh. Okay, so yes, that's one of our transfer jobs. So I don't remember when we first started setting up, we had the consolidation and we had the distribution. So our distribution job, it can be one-to-one or one-to-many, and that's where we just moving it. We're not doing a constant replication.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you can sort of run it on a schedule or trigger it with our API or kick it off manually. It's a nice way to push data out to lots of devices or pull data back in from a lot of devices. It's very convenient. So you can have a mix and match of these different job types.
And there are a couple of questions here really about obtaining Connect. So one user actually has Resilio Sync and they want to know how do they change over to Connect? That's one question. And then there was another question about just bandwidth utilization and going to higher than 1 gigabits per second. So he recently enabled 1 gigabits per second on Connect and was wondering how to go beyond that.
Yeah, good question. So a lot of times sync customers come and they've maybe outgrown maybe they're pushing some of the limits of what sync can accomplish realistically, or they need some of the features that Connect offers that Sync doesn't offer, and they want to switch over to Connect. Sometimes customers actually run both, for different use cases. But it's very easy to, if you're a Sync user today and you want to try out Connect and switch over to Connect and use some of those features, it's very easy to do. We're sort of a customer focused sort of hands-on engineering team where we're not just going to give you the software and let you handle it like it is with Sync. With Connect, you get really great support. Common theme among our Connect customers is that they really love the support, the level of support, and the sort of the hands-on experience they get from our support team. So we can definitely help you with that cutover, although it's not hard. We can help you with any rollout and getting you up and running, and we want to make sure you're successful with it. In terms of getting faster speeds, Connect, we didn't talk about licensing for Connect. And I try to avoid that on webinars that are recorded just because it can get outdated, you know what I mean? And it becomes not useful information anymore. So if you'd like to talk about it, feel free to reach out to us directly. We can schedule a call to talk about it specifically, but at a high level, just to answer the question, we do have different tiers of licensing that allow different features and allow you to scale to larger data sets and faster speeds. So if you have 1 gigabit per second throughput today and you want 10 gigabit, it's as simple as upgrading your license to allow you to have more bandwidth. It's pretty straightforward. Nothing about what you've installed has to change. It's really just a licensing change. That's it.
And there was another question about security. Just is the data encrypted? How are connections secured and so forth? Is there anything we can tell about our level of encryption, end-to-end security?
Yeah, there is, by default, it's AES 256 encryption end-to-end, or so I should say node to node, the traffic that goes across. That's our default level security. You can change that if you have certain cipher suites that you want to use or certain certs that you would like to use. We do support customization as far as encryption and ciphers and certs go. That is something you can completely control. During the initial communication, they do a handshake. It's an encrypted handshake, and that's how they join the management console. And once that happens, they create a custom key between each other for that handshake and any future traffic it goes across. So yes, 100% all of our traffic is encrypted end to end.
And then just some more general questions. Have we done any performance testing, and what are we seeing from a per peer agent basis in terms of performance, and how does that compare to something like rsync?
Sure. So we have done some performance testing. We do see it really depends on scalability and where you're looking to go. If you're doing rsync and one server, well, a lot of times we go head to head with rsync. If you're talking, wanting to start scaling out and getting large data sets, we kind of kick rsync's pants. We do a lot of multi-stream and we do a lot of file chunking, and when we send those files across, we can get multiple streams coming out of that server. And a lot of times we can completely fill up a pipe, 10 gigabits per second plus, where sometimes when you're trying to start scaling out an rsync job, you'll start running into some limitations pretty quickly there. So when we were talking about scaling out to multiple servers or even going over the WAN, it's not a question when it comes to rsync.
Thanks, James. And then this one really just has to do with general hardware support. Is there any special hardware requirements? In other words, can I run instances in a container or virtual machine?
We do support Docker images. We have some roadmap items for additional containered applications. That's not really a problem. We run, like I said, we run on Synology's, TrueNAS, QNAPs. There's several other vendors out there that we run on. So finding something we don't run on is kind of challenging.
Very cool. And then there's one about DR. For situations relating to HA and DR, so what do you need on the target DR site? Would those agents be all read-only, and what goes into recovery?
So it kind of depends on what your DR philosophy is. We have some customers that do the read-only checkbox, like I talked about in the demo, where the DR side can't write back to production. We have some customers that don't do anything and really run in an active-active. And that's kind of the easy DR mode, would be an active-active, where you don't have to do anything. If you use DFSN, you can just flop that namespace back and forth in a DR scenario. It's some way to point the users to the new side. And since we are in an active-active and constantly syncing, there really is no need to fail back or do any kind of cross-replication, because we're constantly keeping that data live on both sides. So it makes DR really easy with our product.
Very cool. And then the other one had to do with just bidirectional sync. So you can imagine there's two sites, you've got bidirectional sync set up. What's to prevent conflicts and data corruption and so forth? Is this, yeah.
I'll say that's kind of a two-pronged question. So conflicts can happen if you have people saving the same file, same name, everything kind of at the same time. Very rare. I've only seen it once in the time that I've worked here. So what do we do in a conflict? We will append .conflict to that file name. We will keep it whole. We won't mess with the contents of it. We'll just append .conflict so you can verify the file and resolve it however you need to. Let's talk about data corruption and saving a file and something bad happening. We have I wouldn't say never, but it's very rare that it would ever happen, and here's why. So let's say we're transmitting a file. Since we chunk that file up into different portions and we save it to kind of an ephemeral folder on the disk and then recompile it at the end, if something were to happen to corrupt a block was dropped or a packet was dropped in transit, what we do at the end of recombining those blocks is we check the hash. If the hash does not match, we will throw the file away. We will not copy it to your live data. And that's how we prevent you from getting that corrupted data into a production scenario, is we verify it when we send it and we verify it when we receive it, and then we'll verify it before we copy it. So it's very rare that you'll ever see corruption.
And then just in terms of Windows servers and syncing Windows servers, is there a way to sync permissions? And also, does it plug into Active Directory?
Yeah, we do work with Active Directory in a couple of ways. We have LDAP. We have LDAP integration if you want to import users and groups for management. We do NTFS permissions, and we do POSIX permissions on Linux. As far as Windows permissions go, we usually need a service account to sync those permissions, and they will need to have full control over the share we're writing to. And that's how we set the owner and permission flags on that file.
So that's an option to turn that on or off, depending on if you need it. I see a couple questions here about desktop sync. So, we didn't talk about desktop sync on this particular webinar, but it's a very popular use case for Connect customers. Sync, I mentioned before that sync is kind of designed for the desktop world and individual users and very small teams. But Connect, you can install, just like you can install Connect agent on a server, you can also install one on a laptop or desktop or, Android device, whatever you need. And sync desktop to desktop, right? If you've got a lot of coworkers and you need to sort of collaborate and sync data between each other, you can do that. And those desktops also can sync with your servers, right? So it's there really is no technology-wise, there's really no differentiation between desktops and servers in Connect. You can sync everywhere. And so you don't need to run sync, Resilio sync, in order to synchronize files with desktops and laptops. You can do everything with Connect. We just didn't talk about it in this webinar because we were focused on server synchronization. So I hope that clears up a few of the questions.
No, that's great. And I think that's going to do it from a question point of view. So with that, we're kind of nearing the end of the hour here. I think let's wrap it up. So Josh, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. James, fantastic demo. And Josh, do you want to say anything in terms of like pricing and licensing and how to get in touch with us?
Yeah, so here on this slide here, you can see there's it's really easy to get in touch with us and talk about pricing, or to see a demo, or to run a demo in your own environment, on your own infrastructure. You can come to our website, schedule a demo, and you'll have a quick conversation with one of our peers here, and we can go through pricing for your particular scenario and talk to you about the different tiers and all that good stuff. And then again, schedule an actual trial, free trial, if you want to install this in your environment, test it out for a few weeks. And one of our engineers like James or somebody in his team can help you get that set up really quickly. So I encourage you, if you have more questions we didn't answer, feel free to reach out. If you want to talk about pricing or what it would look like to cut over from Sync to Connect, get in touch. If you just want to test the waters for free, no commitment. We are not pushy. If you want to test it out, just let us know.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to hear from you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.